This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. This is Python's Paradise, your film and music show, and this is your host, Greg Gilbert, a.k.a. the Python Hyena. And folks, I have a terrific, awesome, legendary figure in Hollywood here with me tonight on the phone. Yes, the guy who created the big shark in Jaws, and among other great special effects. We're talking to Joe Alves. How you do, Joe?
I'm doing fine. Greg.
Enjoying your Easter weekend?
Well, yes. As I have been telling you before, my daughter's getting married here in a couple of weeks, and so we're busily getting the house prepared for 100 people. Which is going to be a challenge.
Is she going to have Bruce the Shark at her wedding?
No shark. No shark. I am working on a tavern sign. She wants a different period than the shark period.
Well,
but my life isn't consumed by sharks. There are other things. I did do 3 shark movies. I think I was pretty well saturated with sharks for a while.
Yeah, I hear you. You kind of get typed to that after a while, but I'm going to tell you, being associated with Jaws is never a bad thing, though.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I could elaborate on this because I do lectures occasionally, but here it is, 43 years or so since 75 that it was released, and I don't know if that's something like that, and people still talk about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen 2 screenings of it.
Yeah, and it started out, the studio didn't really want to make this movie. It was they didn't want to make a shark movie, and it was just a very low budget, $4 million, and I got started on it very early. I was actually on the picture before Spielberg was on. It was, I don't know if you want me to elaborate upon this.
Oh, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
All right,
yeah.
Well, I find this sort of interesting because what I try to tell young people when I give lectures about the studio system. We had a studio system for years. It started to break up in the 70s, but you had Fox, MGM, Paramount, Universal, Columbia, and they had their staff art directors, staff cameramen, editors, and so on. And then there were heads of departments, and they would assign you to a picture or a different project, television if it was, or if you were more in the movie wing. And so if you were more prestigious, you'd get the bigger pictures. So totally different now than today. So the situation is that you sort of worked your way up, like I did as a junior set designer, and then you become, if you're fortunate enough, assistant art director, and then an art director. And at the same time, they didn't really have production designers much. It's the same department, or same actual job, but now everybody uses production design. But in any case, it was a very low-budget picture. Richard Zanuck and David Brown were very, very successful producers. They had done Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting and what have you. And I was fortunate to work with them on a picture called Sugarland Express with a very young director named Steven Spielberg. It was his first theatrical film.
Actually, wasn't Duel his first?
No, that was a television show.
Oh, okay.
This was the first theatrical release.
Okay.
Duel was very successful television, but Sugarland was not as successful, but that was his first actual theatrical release.
Okay.
And so I got to know Dick Zanuck pretty well, really nice guy. And David Brown, who's more the literary guy, he had an office in New York. David had one at Universal Studios. Dick had one at Universal. David was sort of the literary guy from New York. And they bought this this book called Jaws. And so David called me and said, we've got this galley sheets of this book called Jaws, and we think we might have a problem selling it to the studio, and we wondered if you could do some sketches to illustrate the various action in the book. Now, Greg, this is interesting because I was not high on the list. I was a young art director. I wasn't one of the big-time guys. But they knew I was doing television shows, and they didn't have a charge number, so they couldn't hire somebody without having to pay for it out of their own. And so Dick said, well, Joe will do it. He's doing television. He'll have time. So I actually did these drawings on my own when I filled in between scouting the locations and seeing that the sets were done. I started drawing these 24 illustrations about 18, 20. I think they're 24. 16 by 24 charcoal drawings, and so I did these drawings. And Stephen, I would go over and talk to Stephen, and I said, I'm doing this thing with Dick on Jaws. And he says, oh yeah, well, he wasn't really approached by it yet. I don't know why. In any case, after some time, a few weeks, I'd finished it, and I think they brought Stephen in, and we had a big meeting of all the heads of the departments. And Marshall Green was the head of production there. So we had the head of art department, the head of effects, camera, etc., Danica Brown, and Stephen. And so I went through the whole book of activity, the shark attacks, the guy in the cage, he jumps on the boat, and et cetera, et cetera. Am I going on too long about this?
No, go ahead. This is fascinating.
Okay, so what was interesting is I got to Marshall said, okay, to the effects department, what do you think? And they said, oh, we can't build a shark. That would take a couple of years, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. No one's ever done that. And out in the real ocean. And Stephen and I had discussed this. I used to go over and talk to him before he was assigned. We were friends. And he said, yeah, if we're going to do this, let's do it in the real ocean. We don't want a tank. We've seen these movies with these phony tanks in the backdrops. Full-size shark in the real ocean. Pretty naive because no one's ever really done it. And but it would be great if we could do it. And I said, yeah. So what I emphasized in that meeting, it was going to be a 25-foot shark.
Okay.
And it would be animated, and it would be in the real ocean.
Okay.
So the effects department said, no, this is too difficult. We're doing Earthquake, and besides, we're doing the Hindenburg, and, that's our big picture. And Marshall got very upset, and he said, Jaws could be a bigger picture than the Hindenburg. And people sort of laughed because the Hindenburg was going to be their big picture, and this was just a small shark movie,
Wow, did they bite the dust on that?
Yeah, but this is the way things start. And, of course, later everybody wants to take credit for it.
Yeah.
So as everybody was leaving the meeting, and I had talked to Marshall and other projects in the past, and I was collecting my drawings, and he said, Joe, come back. He says, do you think you could get the shark made? And being an ambitious young guy, I said, yes, why not? So he says, okay, but don't make it on the studio lot. Take it off the lot. So that was sort of a new approach because he didn't want it. If they couldn't do it, the effects department was on the lot, take it away and do it independently. So then I started looking for someone to build it. And I went to Disney, and they said, oh, they could probably do it, but they wouldn't take it in the ocean. I said, well, fine, that won't help me. And I met other effects guys, really top ones. And they said, yeah, I could probably do it. It'd probably take a year and a half or so, because we have to develop, the method and test the stuff and all these things. So I finally, someone has said, have you met Bob Maddy? He did the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And he had worked at Disney for years, but he had either retired or he was just out of work or they let him go or something. I don't know. So I met Bob, and he was a very, very positive guy, a lot of energy. He's about 65 at the time. Bob said, yeah, I could do it. Let's get a team together, And so we got a team, Roy Arbogast, who was working and making breakaway bottles, who knew plastics and stuff. When we got Richie Helmer to do electricity, we got the Wood Brothers to do all the welding and stuff, and we put together a team. And we figured we had a year or so to make this thing. So this is October, November of '73, and the book came out in probably January '74. It was such a big success, the studio said, we're going to start shooting this in April or May. Hello?
Yep.
What happened to my year and a half? 3 months, 4 months. So the criticism that they got from people who said about the shark didn't work, well, we tested it, and if it worked, we shot it. So we were testing and shooting at the same time. We were cut off about a year of development on it. So that's the story of the shark.
Wow. Yeah, and
you haven't heard that before?
I have not, no. And I've seen the film a couple of times on the big screen as well. I would have been 3 years old the year that came out in 1975.
Well, you see, that's the problem, is that we didn't have the testing time. The studio didn't even care. They knew that the book was so successful, and they just jumped at it. Well, we got to get started because we want it out for a next summer release. And we pleaded with them. We have a real problem making this shark. Well, it just has got to be done by whatever. So what we ended up was shooting every possible thing we could shoot before we shot the shark. And then I would go to Bob, and I was coordinating between Bob and Spielberg. I'd say, Bob, we've got anything? We had 3 sharks. We had a left-to-right shark, a right-to-left shark, and we had a shark on a a track with a big crane arm. And that one we could pinpoint where it would land on the boat and things like that. So I would say, what do you have ready today that we could use? And he said, I think the left to right shark is working pretty good. So I'd go back to Stephen and I said, well, left to right. And I ended up doing like 200 or more storyboards, shot for shot on the third act. So we would pick out 3 or 4 storyboards that used the left to right shark, and Stephen would shoot that. And that's how we proceeded, limped along till we got the 200-300 shots done that were needed.
Yeah.
So that was Jaws.
Jaws is, of course, a masterpiece. And, of course, you were involved with the first 3 Jaws pictures. What was it like when you went to do Jaws 2?
Jaws 2 was an interesting thing. I had just come off of... the point is we had a real problem. Well, I scouted Martha's Vineyard in December '73.
Okay.
And it was a small movie, so I didn't have a crew. I didn't have a production manager, a scouting location guy. They just sent me in the winter to go look for some place to shoot this. So I met Peter Benchley in New York, and I said, Peter, where did you write this? I mean, where were the towns? He says, well, there's Montauk, Fishing Village, Covington, Sag Harbor, various places. He's an East Coast guy. His parents lived on Nantucket. And I says, okay. And I had a big map of the East Coast, because not only was I looking for the town, I was looking for a view of the ocean where we had maybe a little area a little bay that was like 25 feet deep where we could use the mechanical shark.
Okay.
So I had nautical charts, I had all this stuff, and he pointed out, I said, what about Martha's Vineyard? He says, no, I don't think there's anything there. He says, but go to Nantucket. His father is Nathaniel Benchley. He wrote, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. And, they'll serve you lunch or whatever. So anyway, I started, I did the whole East Coast. I did from Long Island all the way up to Maine. And Martha's Vineyard, to me, was just right on. It had the quaint little village, it had the fishing village, and it had a little bay with the depth of about 25 feet, and it was just perfect. The only problem was that was the winter. When we started shooting the shark, we didn't realize that it was a very popular place to sail boats from Hyannis to Martha's Vineyard. So, and we wanted, and Stephen rightly so, wanted a clear horizon. So we wanted these guys isolated out there, And so we had to wait, or we had to move people with boats. So when I was doing Close Encounters of the Third Kind in Mobile, Alabama, I would go on Sundays to a beach in Pensacola, just a short distance away, and it was incredible, beautiful beach, white sand, and nobody there, nothing. And I said, wow, if we ever shoot a Jaws 2, this would be the place to do it. And I got back home, and Zanuck called me and said, we're doing Jaws 2, and blah, blah, blah. But, Stephen wanted me to do 1941, and Zanuck offered me as associate producer, second unit director, all this stuff. Stephen said, I'll give you the same deal. But I said, good, well, I'll go with you. And he said, well, I don't have a deal yet. So I had a lot of pressure to do Jaws 2.
Do you regret not doing 1941?
Well, in some ways, I regret sort of breaking off the continuity with Stephen, because we did Sugarland, Jaws, and Close Encounters. And I read 41, and I did a art department budget, but it wasn't convenient because he didn't have a deal. And in Hollywood, if you don't have a deal, it's as opposed to a sure thing, Anyway, there's mixed emotions about that.
Yeah.
Besides, a lot of pressure from Zanuck and Brown to do Jaws 2. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just thinking. 1941. They had a tremendous cast in it, including John Belushi.
Yes. It was an interesting. It wasn't very successful.
No, that became Steven Spielberg's first major disappointment. Although it did become have a cult following. I think with 1941, my theory is I think Spielberg was trying too hard to do what he was trying to do. Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and again, Kubrick's a great guy to emulate,
Yeah.
But
right.
I can appreciate what Steven Spielberg tried to do with 1941. But sometimes I think, what they say, less is more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I think, less is more. Well, he had a little problem with more in Close Encounters. We did Close Encounters. I liked it, and then he got involved, I don't know what, with doing the special edition where they have Dreyfuss walk into the spaceship, and then you see all these aliens up here, and he did all these shots, and I thought it was absolutely ridiculous. And then he did 2 later, and then he withdrew the thing, because we had such a beautiful ending with Dreyfuss, the ship closing and sailing away, and the little boy saying goodbye. You didn't need to go in and see a bunch of aliens,
No.
It wasn't necessary. But Stephen was going through this period of trying to make it more, and I think that's what 1941 sort of reflected more. And then he came back and he did E.T., which was more simple,
Yeah.
But the thing about Jaws 2 for me is it opened up another situation. Is I ended up directing 100 Days of Second Unit. They fired the first director, John Hancock, after a couple weeks, and he had a really dim. He wanted a very depressing movie where everything was dark, but the shark destroyed the whole village and everything, and it just didn't work. And so I started shooting a second unit to just catch us up on this schedule, and they were going to shut down the movie, and I went to Ned Tanner, who was the head production president at Universal. I said, and he said, well, are you going to direct it? Well, they thought about Verna Fields and me co-directing it, and she won the Academy Award for editing Jaws. But the Directors Union wouldn't let you do that. They wouldn't let you go from one position to directing.
Okay.
It's just a union thing. So I brought a director in that I worked with on Night Gallery. I did so many night galleries, probably I think 48 night galleries with all these young directors, Spielberg, John Badham, Jeannot Schwartz, and I really liked Jeannot's work, and I thought he was very, controllable. So I introduced him to the producers, and they liked it. So he came on, and we shared a lot of the pain doing it. Jaws 2 I think it was more difficult than Jaws 1, actually, because it was just so many things that kids with sailboats and stuff like that. So it did give me an opportunity to do a lot of directing, which then led to directing Jaws 3D. And so when you say, was it a good thing or not thing doing 41, it was an interesting thing to be exposed to the other side,
Good question. When you did, you went to direct Jaws 3D. What was it like taking the director's seat after being the art director?
Well, the point is, I had really, as I said, directed 100 days of Jaws 2, so I was and actually I directed, the first thing I directed was on Jaws.
Okay.
Stephen was really worn out, and he says, I want to go back and start, cutting this thing. He says, I have a few shots, Joe, that you could do. So some of the barrel shots chasing around, and then there was a shot of the shark attacking a little boy on a raft.
Oh, okay.
And so it was my first directing thing.
You did the boy being attacked on the raft?
Yes.
Oh, that's a great shot.
Yeah, and they had kids in the foreground, and the shark comes up and takes a raft.
Oh, yeah.
So that was my first directing thing.
Okay, congratulations.
So anyway, and it was nice of Stephen to have the confidence to have me do that. And so I was comfortable in that chair. And, as a production designer / art director, especially if you do the storyboards, you really learn how to do shot by shot. You do setup shots, but you do it in your mind and you do it on paper. So the transition to do it on the set with the camera is not that. Hitchcock was an art director before he was a director, and Krubeck did a lot of art directing, and a number of very successful. And Hitchcock, I worked with him, and he had everything planned out, and we would build a half a set, because I would say, Mr. Hitchcock, what about the reverse shot? And he would say, no, I'm not going to do that. This is on Torn Curtain. Mr. Newman walks down the stairs, goes over to the registration desk, walks out. He said, don't build the other side. I don't need that. So my point is, these things are planned out by some directors very well, so they're storyboarded. And so when you make a transition from your storyboards to being on the set, it's just a matter of communicating. Of course, then there's working with the actors, and that's another ballgame, So working on second unit, you're working primarily doing action. The transition to Jaws 3D, I had to work with Dennis Quaid and, Bess Armstrong and John Putch and various people. It takes a while to get that communication, But it's just understanding, talking, and explaining what you want. And But it was a very difficult movie because of the 3D.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
What happened was I was doing a picture called The Ninja with Irv Kirshner in New York. Worked on it for about 8 months. Scouted Japan, built some of the sets in New York. And Fox changed hands, and the new owner canceled everything that wasn't shooting. And so I came back from New York, and I went to see my good friend Verna Fields, who is now a vice president at Universal. And she said they're going to do Jaws 3, and they're going to make a mess of it. She's got this television guy who bought the rights to it. You've got to go talk to him and see if you could direct it. So I went to Alan Landsberg and talked to him. He said, well, you could produce it. I said, no, I was part of the producing and either a director. He said, okay, go scout it, and then we'll talk about it. So I went and I scouted what they had on the script, and I needed something in Florida in a marine park. And while I was at this marine park, I saw this exhibit they had of underwater shots in 3D, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. The people I was with Richard Lesser and some other people, and I came out and they said, "What, Jaws?" I said, "Yeah, Jaws in 3D." I said, "Jaws 3D. First of all, it takes the onus off the third. The Jaws 3.
Mm-hmm.
You make it Jaws 3D because they weren't doing a lot of sequels then." And I thought that was pretty interesting, and it would be a different approach. So I got back, and they got all excited about it, and I did a drawing with a shark in 3D coming out of his mouth, 3D. And showed it to Scheinberg and Lou Wasserman, and I got the directing gig. But what I didn't know, Greg, was that they didn't have any new cameras. It was all old stuff.
Oh.
We called it the Ultra Jam. So Aeroflex made a 3D camera for us. And so we had to actually start shooting before we got it. But it was very, very difficult to get the converges correctly. But it was an interesting experience. And it's interesting. It did quite well. And I have fans that are Jaws 3D fans.
Okay.
I did a thing in France last year. There was a guy who was an absolute nut for Jaws 3D, and he was a collector of all these things in 3D and Jaws, and said he was going to had a theater. He was going to project a new special development of Jaws 3D. I guess a new print or whatever. So he wanted me to send a video, and my wife said, well, let's go to Paris. So we went to Paris, and so I was shocked. I was shocked that, you think about, okay, that movie did okay, but, you don't know there's fan bases.
Yeah.
Things. Anyway, that's pretty much the Jaws stuff.
You mentioned
you have some questions.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about some of your other films as well. You mentioned Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or of course Sugar Lane Express. You worked with Steven Spielberg. First off, what was it like working with Steven?
Well, I worked with Steven on one of the first night galleries, and got to know him there. And then he did a thing called The Psychiatrist. Roy Thinnis was the actor. And he did 2 of the 6, and then it was a canceled show. And then I did Sugarland. And then Jaws came about, and I was glad that they put him on Jaws. And then what happened was after Jaws, I wanted to go skiing up in Mammoth, and a good friend of mine had a condo up there. Dick Smothers is a close friend of the Smothers Brothers years ago. If you remember them, you're probably too young.
Oh, I remember them. Yep.
Anyway, Dick was very nice. He said, "Oh yeah, use our condo." So we went up there, and Stephen was going to do this movie, Bingo Long and the Traveling All-Stars. And it was about black baseball in the 30s. So I got a lot of old Life magazines of that period, and we went up there and some wine, and we got snowed in, and we started talking about Bingo Long. And then he switched subjects, and he said, the Scientific Inquirer, Richard Ellis from the Scientific Inquirer. And I said, "What's this?" He says, "Oh, there's a chapter called Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but I have this script called Watch the Sky, and it sort of involves alien contact and blah, blah, blah," and it goes on about Watch the Sky. I still have one of the original scripts, Watch the Sky. And I said, boy, this sounds a little more interesting than black baseball in the 30s for some reason. I love this sort of UFO kind of thing, but it wasn't just a lot of aliens crashing down on you. It was a very subtle kind of internal experience that this character Roy Neal experiences. So I didn't hear from Stephen, and I needed to go to work, and so I did Embryo.
Okay.
Rock Hudson.
Okay.
Ralph Nelson was the director, and that was an interesting experience. And I used Roy Arbogast to make the embryos, work the embryos, and because he had did such a great job on Jaws. So I finished Embryo, and but before I did Embryo, I got a call from John Badham, who I'd worked with quite a bit on Night Gallery, and he said he was doing a movie called Bingo Long. And I thought, well, I guess Stephen's not doing Bingo Long if John Badham's doing Bingo Long. It's just one of those things. So then Stephen called me and said, would I do that? And I said, of course. And so I went to Columbia. John Veach was head of the production guy there. And he said, well, Stephen is now working on promoting Jaws. It was first week of June in 1975, a few weeks before Jaws was released. So he was doing a lot of interviews. So they sent me off scouting, and a thing that they said, you're pretty small picture. All these pictures are small, Greg. Mm-hmm. $4 million sci-fi picture. Okay, he said, so we're going to shoot everything on the lot here, except we need this weird mountain. Okay, so I got a map out of all the parks, and I flew to South Dakota, look at the backside of Mount Rushmore, and I drove miles, hundreds and hundreds of miles, looking at Chimney Rock, Ship Rock, all these rocks. And Carl Gottlieb had mentioned, there's a thing called Devil's Tower you might be interested in seeing. I was planning on going there anyway, and then I saw Devil's Tower, and I thought, oh my gosh, that is fantastic and perfect, So at that time in film, you did pan shots, you linked them together, and then you made your presentations. And so I did all these different rocks, and by far Stephen said, oh yeah, Devil's Tower is it. So we went up there. Michael Phillips, who was producing at the time, Julia Phillips took over later, and Vilmor Zsigmond, the cameraman, who did Sugarland Express, and we had a good relationship on Sugarland, and so it was good. It was a nice team, and we went there and scouted that, and that's how that started. And then it grew and grew and grew until I ended up building the biggest set ever inside of an enclosure at the time, and we needed to build it in a big set, and they didn't have a set big enough. I had, and this is sort of interesting, this Close Encounters, Greg, because I'm doing this this show, this Winterfest. In the next couple of weeks, in June 2nd, 3rd, Wonderfest, and it's the 40th anniversary of Close Encounters. So they're sort of promoting that, and we're working on a book. Dennis Prince, who's writing it, on just that chapter of my big book, and filling it with all the stuff that we did for Close Encounters, and they had the sets, the stages at Fox, or at wasn't Fox, it was Columbia. Stage 15 and 16 were the biggest sets that they had, and it was still not nearly as big as how I wanted the set to be or had designed it. So we did it in a big hangar. And so it was a huge, huge construction thing, and it just grew. And then we got Doug Trumbull to come and do the visual effects. And the picture went from this very small little effects movie to this sort of, big epic. And unfortunately, it took so long that we were supposed to be released before Star Wars, and we were probably months later, but it was still quite successful.
Actually, it was number 2 to Star Wars in 1977 at the box office, so not bad.
Really?
Yeah.
And that was a November release,
Mm-hmm.
From a personal standpoint, though, I was nominated for the Academy Award for art direction, and I lost to Star Wars. Okay? Now, Star Wars was all English crew. Months later, I was nominated for the BAFTA, for the British Academy Award, and I won against all the English. And so it was sort of funny,
Yeah.
to win the British Academy Award against the Brits. But it was, I think the thing is, we had, set-wise, we had much bigger sets, much more involved. And I thought George Lucas came onto our big set and he said, we never built anything like this on Jaws. On Star Wars, we just kept painting the same sets. But the effects were visual effects were so dynamic, that I think it affected, the whole viewing thing,
Mm-hmm.
So it won for effects and for art direction.
Okay.
But it was quite a year. 77, yeah.
Oh, yeah, a lot of great movies come out that year, Saturday Night Fever came out that year as well, another major movie. Yeah.
Close Encounters. Anyway, I will. When I email you my picture, I'll email you the cover of that book.
Oh yeah,
So you could have it, and it shows the Devil's Tower and a lot of photographs. And that book I will have finished in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
But Dennis Prince has been working on a huge book, and let me just see. We're doing a book, and it's called Joe Alves' Adventures in Film Design.
Okay.
And it pretty well starts in 1955. I know, I'm ancient, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm healthy. Anyway. Greg, in 55, I was at an art school here down in Southern California, and I'm basically from Northern California.
Mm-hmm.
And so I finished that semester, second semester in art school, and I didn't want to go back home. I wanted to get a summer job. And I ran into a friend of mine who said his wife's father worked at Disney. I should give him a call. And I said, maybe I can get a job sweeping up or something, kind of odd thing, and whatever. And I called this man, Andy England, very nice. And he says, you know my daughter Camille? I said, yeah, I do. We went to school together. He says, well, bring in your portfolio. And I said, well, okay. I don't know if I'm ready yet. I was 19 years old. And I brought my portfolio in, and he said, Well, you're too late for the training program. See, they have a training program because they're going to do Sleeping Beauty, and so they train you how to do in-betweening and stuff like that. And you start as an in-betweener.
Okay.
Or trainee that after 40 days you become an in-betweener. Anyway, he said, but I'll put you in special effects. You know, drawing water, rain, waves, fire,
Yep.
all that stuff. That's a special department. And so I said, okay. So they put me in this room with this lady. And I said, what do I do? She says, oh, you flip the pages and draw in between. Oh, okay, that seems pretty simple. And very nice lady. And after I was doing this and was training me, and she started working for this guy, Dwight Carlisle, and he was assisting Josh Metter. Josh Metter was the effects animator. He did the fire scene in Bambi. He did Night in Bald Mountain. He was the incredible effects animator. And they had a contract with MGM to do Forbidden Planet, to do this thing called The Id.
Great movie.
And so she worked for she was starting to work with Dwight, and after a few weeks she said, I have to leave, but you could just take over with Dwight. So after less than 2 months, I'm working directly with the assistant to Josh Metter, working on this Id. And after about another month, Dwight had to go into the hospital. And now I moved up to be an assistant to Josh Metter. After 3 months, and it generally takes years and years to become an assistant, and then more years to become an animator. And it was freaky. It was so freaky that now I'm passing out work, giving it, I'll do drawings and I pass it to somebody else to do it. And we had to render. We weren't going to ink and paint anything, like you normally do. We had to render every frame. So because the Id was supposed to be electronic and stuff, so we didn't want to have little animation lines, cartoon lines. So that's what I did at Disney. And then after that, I worked on Sleeping Beauty. I did the Thorns and stuff, and that lasted for a couple of years. And then work slowed down, and then I really wanted to get into live action, and went and worked at a little theater called the Hollywood Playhouse. And so funny because we were doing sets. Did a set for a thing called Big Knife, and Clifford Odets was the writer, and he shows up to this little playhouse,
Yep.
The writer, Clifford Odets. And he was very impressed with what we had done. We had it was about a play about a movie star, and his wife drives from Malibu to Beverly Hills, and we photographed that. And so the audience saw a movie, a screen, and then she walks up the front door. I match the door. The screen comes up, the curtains open, and we're in the set. So the director wasn't there, and Odets wanted to talk to who was responsible for this. So I'm about 21-year-old guy now, 22 or something, and he says, I really like what you did. I think I'm going to use it when I reopen this in Broadway. So it was quite an experience to have that, and that developed a portfolio. And then I went into set designing, which then you do the drafting for the art directors so they could build the sets.
I was going to say, when you worked on Forbidden Planet, did you do anything with Robbie the Robot?
No. What we did was the animation of the Id. Now, Robbie the Robot was Bob Kinoshita designed that, and he was an art director that I later worked with. In fact, he gave me my first job as a set designer. And Bob just died at 104 last year. And he did Robbie the Robot and a number of robots. It was his big claim to fame. Very nice guy. And when I was running around trying to get a job as a set designer with my portfolio, he was working at Men into Space or something was a William Lundigan thing back in there, early 60, 59, 60. And so he hired me. He gave me a shot at being a set designer, and then from there, then you bounced around, and it's going back to my the studio system. Then I went to Fox, worked on a number of things from The Terrace, and then I went to MGM, and I worked on the boat for Mutiny on the Bounty and How the West Was Won, and so then I went to Fox, and I worked a little bit on My Fair Lady, and so you became a small cog in a big wheel. You know, you did some drawings, you weren't really on the set, and then if things worked out for you, you became assistant art director. And then when I worked on Torn Curtain, I was an assistant to Frank Riegel, who was the art director, and Hein Heckroff was the production designer from Germany. And he was brought in because there was a big ballet sequence, and he had won the Academy Award for Red Shoes. Anyway, so you with the studio system, you start in a big drafting room, and you're just a little guy doing the details, the drawings, and then hopefully you get to be out and about as an art director. And it's a different process. Today, they don't have that as much.
I was going to say, last year, May, I had the pleasure of interviewing Alfred Hitchcock's granddaughter. And having it was such an honor having her come on, and she was very down to earth, very lovely, and it was nice to, because Alfred Hitchcock was really the one that shaped how I view movies today,
Oh, yes.
And you worked with him on Torn Curtain. I was just wondering, what was it like working with him and the process of Torn Curtain?
Well, let me tell you, there was people that called him Hitch. I called him Mr. Hitchcock. A few people. So he as I said before, he had been an art director. He relied on the pre-production and the development of the project more than actual shooting. He seemed to be almost, when he got to shooting, he just knew what he was going to do. Okay, we'll get this shot, we'll move on. But the day would start like this, Greg. Mm-hmm. We'd get there, and of course, this was 1965, 66. We wore sport coats and ties. Everybody had to, you wear a tie. Hitchcock wore a black suit, black tie, all the time. And so we would have coffee. There was always coffee on the set, and he would tell very unfunny jokes.
Okay.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
And so he was saying about this scene in the fjords, it's so cold, and Mr. Newman is traveling on the boat, and it is so cold that he has to eat his asparagus with gloves on. And we're supposed to laugh now. See, because Hitchcock is a gourmet, and you properly eat asparagus with your fingers. You pick it up. That's the proper way to eat asparagus. I don't know if you know that, but that's Hitchcock. And so the fact that it was so cold he couldn't eat it the proper way, he had to have his gloves on. And we're sort of looking at, okay, now we're supposed to laugh, But that's Hitch,
Okay.
And so it wasn't funny. But like I said before, we would plan things. He would plan things like we would build half sets. He called me to his office one time. The production designer and the art director were away doing something. And Peggy, his assistant, called me. And funny, I remembered her name because I just watched last year a show, I think, with... it was about Hitchcock, and I was thinking, God, what's that lady's name? And it was Peggy. And then they mentioned Peggy. And she said, Mr. Hitchcock wants to see you. I said, well, me? Why? How come, the art director? No, he wants to talk to you. So anyway, he said, he took this pencil, and he drew this set, but the pencil never left the paper. It was just crawling like a worm over the thing. And he was telling me, okay, he says, Mr. Newman walks down these stairs. I want you to build the stairs. Mr. Whitlock, who does the matte paintings, is going to. Mr. Whitlock does this, and over here you do this and you do that. And it was like the shot was so tight and prepared, and that's the way he worked. He seemed to have more fun in the preparation of the shot than doing the shot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've heard that about him. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I was still at Universal, and after I finished that, I think I worked on I worked Change of Habit, the last movie that Elvis Presley did with Mary Tyler Moore.
Oh, okay.
Change of Habit, and then I became an art director. So at that time, they were doing television, and so when you become a first-time art director, you start doing television right away. Pretty much. You got your own show, and so then I think fortunately was to do Night Gallery with Rod Serling, and I used to meet with Rod, and it was just great. All these young directors, and we'd do so many shows. Each hour we'd have 2-3 shows, and so I had to build so many sets. And we had Agnes Moorehead, we had Edgar G. Robinson, we had Betty Davis. We had some big stars who would come in and do one of those sequences,
Mm-hmm.
It was quite an experience. I think that would probably help me more in my designing than anything, because I had to do so much of it, and I had to, it had a certain quality look to it. And then the big thing was movie of the week. So there were these television movies, or 90-minute television movies, and there were a lot of those. And then I did Heck Ramsey with Richard Boone. And we did a couple of 2-hour shows, and that was interesting, working with Boone and doing a Western. It was Western, but it was like 1903 Western, so it had some occasional car in it, and it had sheriffs with derbies and stuff. Interesting. And so, you work then Sugarland, and then Jaws, and then after Jaws, I pretty much... Embryo was outside the studio, Close Encounters was outside the studio, and then the studio was sort of breaking up. So then what you had to do was get an agent to go find jobs,
And of course, that led you to working with a filmmaker that I have a lot of respect for, John Carpenter, Escape from New York. Let
me tell you about that.
Yeah, I interviewed Adrienne Barbeau from that movie.
Yeah, I saw Adrienne just last year at one of these shows.
She's a sweetheart, yeah.
Monsterpalooza or something. Very nice lady.
Yeah.
What happened was, that was 1980. 79, I used to race cars. In the 60s, early 70s, I raced Formula cars. And it was a hobby of mine. And I got involved with Indianapolis. I did a visuals for one of the first television broadcasts of it. But I raced cars for a long time. And so it was a sort of a hobby of mine. And I had this picture called Out in Front. It was about Formula One racing, and James Brolin was going to be involved. I met with James. I went to Europe. I scouted most of the major tracks in Europe. It was pretty well locked in. I was going to direct this big race movie. And I got back, and the studio got sold to somebody else. And so that was dead. And then I tried some other directing things. Because I had directed so much on Jaws 2, I thought I would move into directing. And my agent at the time, Phil Gersh, was a big-time agent. But he was an agent in the early days with Humphrey Bogart and David Niven. So, but he switched. He let his sons handle actors and stuff. He wanted to just handle art directors and directors of photography. So he said to me, after some time went without working and these directing things fell apart, he said, I want to introduce you. You guys just go back to work, Joe. He says, I want to introduce you to the young people here, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill.
Okay.
And he says, I think you could help them. They could help you. It would be fun. So I met with Deborah and John, and Deborah and I became good friends. She died very young.
Yeah.
Very unfortunate. And I met John, and he's a very laid-back guy, very laid back. And so I read the script, Escape from New York. I said, okay, this is cool. And I was pretty high paid, actually, for that small movie, but they agreed to do that. And Dean Cundy was a cameraman, extremely good cameraman. But John was a little laid back, and his crew was a little bit. And I said, look, John, we got to find a bridge that goes into a wall, or find a wall or something, but we've got to get moving on this thing. And he thought at first I was a little aggressive. I said, but that's, I was used to doing something. You had to get moving,
Mm-hmm.
And Barry Bernardi was the location guy. And I said, well, we've got to get Barry moving. And okay. So we went to St. Louis. We found a bridge that nobody was using. And so I'll build a wall. And then when we saw the downtown, well, first of all, John and Larry Franco and I flew to New York because we were going to do, New York, Escape from New York, make New York a prison. And we got on top, this is sad, we were on top of the trade towers, which no longer exist, and we were looking at New York, and we were saying, we can't do this. It's just too big. It was just overwhelming how we could shoot New York. So what happened was, when we found St. Louis, we found the whole area of St. Louis was urban renewal, so we could do anything we want. They'd let us shoot at night. We'd bring in all this junk. We would shoot it. And then I found an airplane there for sale, really cheap. I took off the propellers, made it the president's jet. We found a train station. It was just great. And the only thing we shot in New York, I built this big set. It's above the dam here. It's a big flat area in L.A. And I had built the set, and Tommy Atkins walks in. It was like the sentry post. It was the entrance to the military area. So it was an easy set. So we collapsed the set. We trucked it. This is how cheap we were. We trucked it across the United States. We took the last ferry to Liberty Island. We set up the set. We brought Tommy Atkins down the Statue of Liberty, walked him in through the registration he signed to go into, this special entrance to this military thing. And then there was about a couple feet of just black, and Dean Cundy cut it there, because then it says United States Police. Mm-hmm. So then we trucked the set back to L.A., set it up, put the camera in the same place, got everything perfect, started the shot again, and then Tommy walks out, and he's in L.A. So it's a continuous shot.
Oh, that's a great shot, too, yeah.
It's a continuous shot that starts in New York and ends in L.A. And so the movie was low budget, but it was very, very simple. We built pieces. I built a piece of the chock full of nuts that matched New York. And so we went from St. Louis to the chock full of nuts, which I built out in the desert because we couldn't afford a stage. And then I built the top of the Trade Center because we couldn't shoot that. And so we selectively built what we had to. And Dean was an incredible cameraman. And it was one of the more fun movies I've ever worked on, actually. And John really got into it. He realized that I was a little aggressive with stuff, and he'd say, the airplane burning. He said, we're just going to shoot Joe shots today, or blah, blah, blah. But a very laid-back guy, but I think he did a really good job, and I think it was surprisingly became this sort of cult film.
Yeah, he did that as his follow-up to Halloween, and Halloween, of course, was a great movie, and he followed that phenomenon up with Escape from New York, and and great cast. Kurt
Oh
Russell,
yeah,
Lee Van Cleef, Donald Pleasance, Adrian Barbeau, Harry Dean Stanton. You could go on.
yeah,
So many
yeah.
great people.
It was great, and yeah, it had the style. It was really really interesting. I had such a great time, but you've got to look at how I was looked at because they came off the Fog and Halloween, and I came off of Jaws and Close Encounters.
Okay.
It was like two different areas. So I was, aggressive. We got to do this and that, and John, he took a little while to understand. Okay, I guess this is where because he was making a step up. This was 3 times what the budget was on the. Oh my God, no, the Fog, Halloween was like $300,000. This was $6 million.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a big film for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do like the Chock full of nuts too. That was where he met, where Kurt Russell encounters Susan Healy. So
Yes. Yeah.
Nice little
And then
sequence.
he fell through. Excuse me.
Yeah, she goes through the floor where all the people are
Yes,
drinking.
we had to make a breakaway. Excuse me.
Okay.
So yeah, that was good. And then I did. Let's see. After Jaws 2, I know what I did with John again. It was a
Starman, yeah.
And he wanted me to design it, and I said, no, because I'm directing. But what I'll do is, I did visual concepts.
Okay.
And visual concepts, and I did all the second unit directing, which was sort of fun, running around.
Yeah.
And that was it. And then,
I was going to say, when you worked on Sugar Lane Express, I just wondered, do you have any memories of Goldie Hawn? Because I'm still a fan of hers.
Oh yeah, I love Goldie. Are you kidding? She was great.
Yeah.
She was a very fun, spirited person.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had a nice time.
Out of all the, I was going to ask, out of all the, I know you worked as the art department and worked in all of these behind the scenes and special effects and whatnot, but I was wondering if there's any actors that you worked with that you're taken with, you really enjoyed working with them the time you did.
Well, I got to be pretty good friends with Paul Newman.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the, actually what happened was, Paul came to me on Torn Curtain.
Okay.
And he says, I understand you're a race driver.
Okay.
I said, yeah, I have a Formula 3 car. He says, well, I have this Volkswagen with a Porsche engine. Is there someplace I could take it out and run it? And I said, yeah, Willow Springs. We could rent the track with like $20 a day. And we could, really good road course. He says, okay. So we went out there. And there's a book on Paul Newman racing. And there's a picture of me with Paul. And he ran around. He was really quite good. And so after some time, I said, do you want to try the Formula car? He says, really? I said, yeah. Now with a Formula car, you're it's a single-seater. They're open wheels. There's no fenders, and you're sitting in the middle like a small Indy car, and you're strapped in,
Okay.
5-point harness. And he's got these big blue eyes, and he says, "Oh my God, he says, if Hitchcock knew I was doing this, he'd sue me for $1 million." And he says, "And you'd probably never work in this town again." So it was cool. Anyway, he went out and he was going very fast, and he came to this turn 9, which is decreasing radius, and he sort of overcooked it a little bit, and he spun into the dusty area, dirt area, and it just disappeared in a cloud of dust. And I thought, oh my God, I just killed a superstar. And I ran there, ran. And I got there, the dust had settled, and his big eyes, and he had collapsed the front suspension, so the tire was laying down, And he said, "Boy, that was fun," And anyway, I had mentioned to him, I said, "You're really good. You should consider racing." And he said, "Well, I think I'm a little long in the tooth." He was 43 then. But he started racing sports cars. And in the book, the Paul Newman race book, he would change his number to his age. And his last race, he qualified first, and he won, and the number was 83.
Okay.
And he died about 6 months later of cancer, but he was racing until he was 83 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so he was a cool guy, and then we worked on winning together.
Okay.
And so of the big stars, that's the one that I got the closest to, And he was a great guy. He didn't like to talk too much about acting. If you want to talk about racing, fine. But, the acting was something he did. He kept it to himself. He was a method guy,
Mm-hmm.
So that was it. Yeah, I would say he was one of the better people. And, I worked Julie Andrews seemed like a very nice lady on Torn Curtain. We'd walk around the lot with Paul, and she'd be singing, It was very cool. It was a great experience.
Wow. And Julie Andrews still doing well today,
Well, I would hope so, yeah.
like still working, and of course the stuff, like a lot of the older stuff she did, like Torn Curtain and Mary Poppins and Sound of Music, some terrific stuff there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She was great.
Yeah.
Great.
Wow.
But Goldie was a super lady, so sweet.
Yeah.
Couldn't have a nicer person.
I like Goldie, yeah.
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 So that was it.
Well, you know what? It has been so great talking to you about all these films. And, I've seen all of them, like Jaws, Close Encounters, Forbidden Planet, Escape from New York, and, Torn Curtain, and all those great movies that you've been involved in. And, it was Steve Joyner. I got to point out, Steve Joyner, of course, was the guy that hooked us up. And you're my 116th interview I've done since April of 2015. And,
wow.
And
you've been busy.
Oh, I've been very, very busy. I did 20 in 2015. I did 48 last year. And I won the Barry Award for Best Spoken Word Show here at CHSR. Wow. And I gotta say, that 48 interviews I did last year is going to be broken by the end of this month of April.
Oh, busy guy.
I've been very busy. And Stephen Joyner was my first interview this year. And I think he added me on Facebook through an actress I'd interviewed. And through him, I've had the experience and pleasure and honor of interviewing people like yourself and so many great film personalities. And I was just wondering how you come to know Steve.
Oh, Steve, because of Jim Beller. He made contact with Jim Beller. Jim Beller handles my artwork, and Jim is a big collector of Jaws, everything, memorabilia, everything. And I met Jim at one of the reunions on Martha's Vineyard on Jaws, and I had these storyboards that I had done, and I owned them because they never paid me for them. I did so I had the storyboards, and he said, you should sell these online. I said, oh, it's a lot of trouble. He said, no, I'll handle it. So we've been friends for over a dozen years now, and I guess Steve had met Jim, and Jim called me the other day. We were talking. He said, do you mind if I give Steve your number? And I said, no, fine. So that was just last week.
Oh.
I talked to him just shortly before I talked to you.
Oh, wow. I did not know. Wow. You must go to do Steve's podcast eventually called Curtain Call.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
I guess he'll hear this one, right?
Well, yeah, when it goes up, yeah. Steve's been very good to me. I didn't realize he hadn't known you as long as quite.
No,
Yeah,
couple
wow.
not long before I talked to you.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, Steve's been very, very good at hooking people up with interviews, and there's been
Yeah.
some other great podcasts he's been hooking people up with. So you may have a few more coming up.
Well, I don't mind talking. Anyway. I want to sort of promote this book we've been working on for so long. And
Absolutely. Go. You do it. You do that.
all right, I guess.
So, what's the book called again?
Joe Alves' Adventures in Film Design.
Okay.
And then the short book, which we're going to have at the show in Louisville, is just Close Encounters scrapbook.
Okay.
And I'll send you a copy of the cover of that.
Okay.
And maybe we could promote that sometime.
Oh, I absolutely would promote that. Are you going to have anything that's going to have anything with your other films? Like I know you said you'd had so much fun on Escape from New York, and
Well, in my big book, it'll have just about everything I've done.
oh, okay. Oh,
It'll
perfect.
start with Embryo. It'll go from that to some of the stuff I did on the Hollywood Playhouse. And then it's a mad, mad, mad world. I worked on that for many, many months. Stanley Kramer film.
Okay.
All the, and then the Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm.
Then Night Gallery, and then probably the stuff with Richard Boone, and then after, let's see, Jaws, and then I did other things like that weren't as popular, but they were interesting to work on, like Geronimo.
Okay.
With Walter Hill and a Steven Seagal film. And then I ended up with 2 animated movies, one that never got finished, but it was a great idea. And then I did Sinbad, Beyond the Mist. It was an animated film, motion capture for an Indian company.
Okay.
And, so just stuff, a lot of stuff.
Wow. That sounds to me like it'll be a great read, and you'll have lots of pictures in it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I have tons of pictures.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, you know what?
Okay.
What an honor it has been to talk to you. I consider you one of the greats. And again, a special thanks to Stephen Joyner for hooking us up. I want to say good luck on your daughter's wedding.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Before you go, I was wondering if you would mind doing a plug for my show.
Okay.
Yeah. Just state your name, and the show that you're on right now is called Python's Paradise. And,
yes.
And my name, of course, is Greg Gilbert, and I'm in New Brunswick, Canada.
Okay, so how would you like me to say this?
Just state your name and say you're listening to Python's Paradise with Greg Gilbert in New Brunswick, Canada.
Hi, I'm Joe Alves. You're listening to Python Paradise with Greg Gilbert.